Hey folks, so we are back with another Substack conversation. I'm really excited to be here this afternoon. I'm recording in Alfred, New York. I'm home in the whole house again. And I'm here with my friend Beatrice, who I met many years ago at a theology colloquium at Drew Theological School where they did their PhD work. I've been very impressed with their work for many years. I subscribe to their Substack, which I've asked them to let you know about. Beatrice, thanks so much for doing this recorded conversation. Would you let folks know who you are, where you are, and the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, so I am in Louisville, Kentucky right now. I live in Louisville and I work at Hanover College, which is about an hour outside of Louisville in southern Indiana. And I teach in a theological studies department. And I have a PhD in theology and, teach in a program where we do theology, but from a kind of interreligious perspective or standpoint. So it's like a department that's a little bit of a mix of theology and religious studies. And then I have a Substack, Galactic Underworlds, and I have a lot of stuff on there that's kind of, I think I tend to think about stuff that's on the moodier side. So I wrote a book called SisterDeath, which is about death, and then we're going to talk a little bit today, I think, about an article that I wrote about theology, which is about the death of theology. So I think generally speaking, I would say my work is a little kind of moody, but I also think I'm interested in stuff that a lot of us don't get space to talk about or don't maybe
Yes.
want to talk about very often.
And maybe that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I am doing in real time is composting my anger and rage. And that requires a certain kind of death. Death to self, death to ego, and death to the ways that I've been trained and conditioned in many ways. And so when I saw your article this summer or late spring on the death of theology, I was like, what really might that look like? Because on the one hand, as an admitted anti-fascist, anarchist, anti-institutionalist, I'm like, yes, kill the departments. They shouldn't be funded by neoliberal capitalism. That project is not working. And yet, on the other hand, if we kill theology or if we put to death theology, what is our anchor? Now, let me define theology because maybe that would also help in having this conversation. I think theology for a long time has been taught as some kind of certain belief or dogma. And I actually understand theology as a way of life or as ethics. It's a way of being in the world. It's a way of embodying wisdom and enacting it in everything you do. And that is not how I was trained, I would say. And so I would like to put to death the things that need to be put to death. What does it mean to put theology to death, and how might that help us right now? Or what is your imagination for possibility?
Well, I think that, first of all, just in case any of your listeners are concerned that I'm, making an argument that's bigger than it really is, the piece that I wrote for the other journal was mostly about academic theology.
Yes.
And so I think, you and I both share like a sort of similar educational background. And I think the two of us have probably both also like encountered a lot in our education that we've had to sort of resist in order to be who we are. And I think the fact that, we are a couple of only a very few academics in our field who even bothered to put our work out there on Substack is somewhat of an indication of the fact that, like, I think we probably are doing things a little differently.
Yep.
And that we're a little bit less like bound to the institution and the kinds of like publishing formats that it tends to reward. So I have a complicated relationship with theology, and I I come to theology, not as someone who grew up in a religious tradition or who, actively practices a religious tradition, but I'm sort of a more non-religious. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself particularly secular, if only just because like my academic field is theology. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like,
Right. Yeah, you're honest. I appreciate. This is what I've always appreciated about you. You're fucking honest.
I mean, it is what it is, right? Like how secular can you be when you
Right.
like literally work in theology?
Right.
So
Jesus, he always sneaks up on people.
it's it's a complicated relationship, but I've certainly had a lot of there's been a lot of ways where I think I haven't felt like I fit very well in the
Right.
field. I resent some of the ways that I think actually like our real lives, our actual identities, like the way that we are, who we are, tends to get reduced into this sort of highly specific and very dry framework.
Yes.
But I also think that like at some point, I did come to value just the 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 kind of community that I ended up becoming a part of as someone who does academic theology. It's a strange and unique academic environment. I think
Yeah.
I sometimes will say to people that I think like theology is sort of like the last like true generalist field in
Yeah.
academia.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like where you can
Yeah.
people are like, well, so what's your like what do you do? Like what's your
Right.
specialization? And like I think it tends to be like whatever you're into at the given moment, right?
Right. Right.
But I think it's one of the very few fields where you can still just like be into a bunch of different stuff or like take a bunch of different approaches and not
Right.
necessarily have somebody like question you and be like, well, how are you still doing the same thing? And I think there's things about the academic field as an academic field that I have come to realize that I would miss and probably would lament the loss of if those things weren't available for future generations of people. But I mean, I think that higher education in the United States is threatened right now.
Mm.
Like theology isn't the only academic field that's
Right.
being threatened. I mean, people have lost a lot of trust in academia.
Well, did you just see the New York Times opinion piece where the Barnard College president praised Charlie Kirk for his fight for free speech?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, people are losing trust in their leaders, like
Yeah.
inside of
Yeah.
academic institutions, and people outside of the academic institutions are losing trust in, not just leadership, but also just the whole institution in general. So I think this is like a really hard time
Yeah.
to try and defend or like to want to protect these institutions, because I do think there's just a lot of public anger
Yeah.
and a lot of people are feeling upset about the way that these institutions have failed us. So I think there is a lot of energy that people have to sort of to think about how we can take some of what has been the best parts of these academic disciplines and fields and potentially translate them into other spaces, places, or contexts.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if I'm hearing you right, but I think
Yeah.
that's part of what, your project is all about. Just, I mean, your Substack and the
Yeah.
kind of that you do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, this is why your article interests me, because when I read the article, and I think folks should read it. And yes, it is about the academic discipline of theology, but it makes me think about much broader things, because when we say one thing, we're not just saying one thing, but we're saying many things, and it got me to thinking about what does it look like to compost the academic discipline of theology that is housed within a particular framework? What does it look like to compost that and imagine another possible future? And I think your book Sister Death, and many people will say we live in a death cult right now, a death culture, but we don't really know how to talk about death. I don't even know how to talk about putting my ego to death or composting my anger and rage, right? We don't have the language, we don't have the frameworks, we don't have the tools. And all this is to say, for those of us like myself who are healing from generational cycles of violence, what we are witnessing right now is how we have been raised in our family system, right? And so how do we work with the death energy, with the composting energy, What should our rituals be? What might the galactic underworlds teach us? That's what that article did for me. It set me on a path of like, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. I trust this person. What do we do? So I'm like, okay, we got to talk.
Well, I do think that like part of what I hoped that the article would do would be to like, I mean, I think I wrote it in large part for, people like me who have some kind of an academic background in theology. And so who would have some sort of like feeling when they saw what theology, like whether, however you feel about it now, like this point in your academic career, like I have like some kind of a relationship to that. And I hoped that people would feel like they felt like a little bit of a call towards like legacy building in a
Yeah.
way, right? And also I think that, part of death work is actually figuring out like what am I gonna like what do I want to be passed on, right? Like, and
Right.
what, not only like how do we learn to let go of things, but also like what are the things that I want people to continue to carry, and like who do I want to pass those things on to, or how do I want to make sure that we can continue to carry these things or continue to have these things? Because I think that element of inheritance is a super important part of doing death work that I think we often forget when we only think about death as a kind of letting go, or sort of, which, I mean, it is obviously that too, but I think that there is always also that forward moving momentum in death work as well. So
Yes.
it sounds like to some extent, that desire to figure out like what
Yes.
you want to take from what you've been given, and how
Yeah.
you want to carry that forward comes through.
And that's all of us, right? I mean, we're all trying to figure out how to be good ancestors on some level, or however we might phrase that, what legacy we leave, etc. I mean, we are living in a moment right now of, I kind of call it like sobriety. Like, this is a sobering moment for many of us, politically, spiritually, economically. And, you know, what could the death world, or how could the death world, or these death rituals help us to reframe our imagination? I think for many of us, our imagination, I know mine is directed toward utopia. But what if that is not true?
I mean, I think that no matter what, if we're ever going to think about the future, it's always imagined, right? I mean, the future just doesn't exist. And so, I think whether we imagine that the future will have like a sort of positive cast, or whether we imagine that it's doom, I think both of those are invented, right? Like,
Yes.
and I think that we always have a choice about sort of how we're going to invent and recreate the image of the future that we're living towards. And I think none of it is completely true, because all of it is imagined.
Yes. Yes. So much of my work is about imagination. And I tend to, or I did at least in my PhD program, less now, but I worked with a lot of sort of unintelligible theorists, and am learning in real time how to become practical, because I live in the poorest county in New York with working class people, Republican dominated county and region of Western New York. And I am learning in real time what it means to be with people. And I'm learning that we all long for some kind of connection and belonging. And as I look around, and I'm not sure about your context, but I know people here are not focused on imagining connection. They're focused on fixing problems. And I'm just wondering, you know, let's take this death metaphor seriously. What if we put to death the kinds of relational patterns that have brought us to this moment, and enact something else?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it too is like also just starting to understand what those relational patterns are.
Right.
And I think that's where work like yours is important. And I think that like if there aren't people out there saying like, hey, actually connection is something super valuable and that like we should want and we shouldn't want to just like be isolated and all alone.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the more that, we have people in our like lives, but also in our like social media environments who
Yeah.
remind us about this, the more that we're reminded of the fact that it's a problem. But I
Yeah.
think if nobody's talking about it, then I think it's easy to forget that
Yeah.
that's like another possibility in the first place.
Tell us a little bit about Sister Death, because this is where I am thinking about death, and I want people to read your book. And I seriously, I want people to subscribe to your Substack and read your book, because I think we need to be a little bit more emo these days and get in touch with our moods. I'm serious.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, we're kind of emotionally not well. I would use a different word, but it would be people might judge me if I use a different word. So I won't use that word. But we're emotionally stunted. I know I am. And so tease out some of the work in Sister Death that we might be able to apply to this moment so that we can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I have always been drawn to talking about death in part because for me it's been a reminder of the fact that I'm alive, right? I think like to some extent, there is in like just our general awareness of mortality, like the reminder that we're still here and that there's still time and that we can
Yes.
be grateful for that time. And so for me, I always find it this like really powerful way of just kind of like dropping the BS and like trying to refocus again on like what's really important and what really matters. Like I remember at one point, a friend was kind of telling me like, oh, I don't know if I should be doing this thing in my career anymore because it's so stressful and it's exhausting me. And I think I might have said something at the time. Like I was like, well, at least you're doing something that is like a good thing to do, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like the right thing to do. And you're not going to have like, you're not going to have like existential like fears that keep you up at night about like whether or not you're like doing terrible things in the world. And
Right.
I was, this is like this is how I think about things, And
Yeah.
I remember like this friend saying to me like years later, like, I still think about that thing you said. Like,
Yeah.
and I think it's actually good. Like, I think it's good to remember that like everything is finite and that sucks, but it's also good, right?
Yes.
Like the good things don't last forever, but neither do the bad things.
Right.
And there are, forms of change that we have to live through that are it's just the way things are.
Yeah.
And I think that there is something about just understanding that we don't have the power to control the cycles of life and death is a good
Right.
reminder of the fact that there are just things we have to surrender to and we have to kind of make our peace with.
Yeah.
So I think that I don't mean to like suggest that we should feel like resignation to the way that things are, but
No.
I also think that it is a helpful reminder of the fact that like all things all things come to an end,
Yeah.
and I think the future always looks different than we think it will,
Mm.
and it may look worse than we think it will, but it might not. But I think that generally speaking, we often tend to think that conversations, culturally, then this is part of the argument of the book. I think culturally we tend to think that conversations about death are always just like doom conversations, or they're
Right.
conversations about things that we don't want or things that are going wrong. And I think, especially in American culture, we tend to be so focused on positivity, the power of positive thinking. I think we feel this obligation, especially in like social media spaces or, places like Substack. We always feel this obligation to sort of be bright and happy. Um,
Right.
I think certainly like people don't engage with the moody stuff as much as they engage with the
Right.
bright and happy stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Like give them
That's
like,
that fucking toxic positivity that is not real, and it is not sustainable. I mean,
yeah.
Ted Lasso was great, and also it came to an end for a reason, right? You can't continue to perpetuate. The story has to change. There has to be an interruption of the pattern, and I feel like a death culture and death rituals, or composting is the language that I use, that might help us right now to be the interruption in the story.
Well, I think it's really interesting when you take a look, for instance, at like how like there's been like this rise in death doulas, which I think has happened really, especially since COVID.
Yeah,
And this was something that I didn't really end up writing much about in my book, but I do think is just like a really interesting phenomenon. And I just wasn't really sure how I could do the whole phenomenon justice, given that I also was like had a bunch of philosophical arguments that I was making. But I think it is really interesting to notice how many more people are becoming death doulas. And this actually gets back to like an interesting like point about institutions. So one of the things I started noticing after 2020 was both a rise in, people being death doulas and doing death doula work on like social media, but also a rise in people like doing certificate programs. Like, so, if you want to become a death doula, like here's a certificate program. This has kind of exploded, but
yeah,
a lot of the people who are doing these certificate programs aren't necessarily particularly qualified. And so I think a
right.
lot of people had questions about like, well, I want to do this program, but like, how do I decide, which program to do? Who do I trust? And so I actually have noticed that there's been at least one program in an actual like seminary context or which is ILIF,
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
which I thought was really interesting. And so it's not part of their like uh, seminary program necessarily. I think it's more of like a certificate
yeah,
program. But I think that like this is kind of an interesting, like I think there is something about institutions that tends to like authorize work
right.
that's being done, and I think that
It
there
makes
is
it intelligible.
it does, and I think that it also like it also tends to sort of like filter things out a little bit. I mean, they want to make sure that the people who are going to be offering programming have real world experience. And, I think that there is a different kind of vetting that will often come when something
Hmm.
becomes part of an institutional context.
Well, yeah, it's that over professionalization of capitalism.
Right. And so is that valuable in this context? Isn't it? Right. I
Right.
don't know. I mean,
I
I think
mean,
that,
people say that I give too much content away, and I'm like, I just need enough to live. I ain't trying to be rich. Like, who wants to hoard money? God, no, not me. And I just think, could we be doing more in community? Could we return to community supported events? So I talk about my work being community supported. I live off of Substack. I live off of many other things. I have got 14 jobs, and that feels better and more honest to me than putting my eggs in one basket that seems to be collapsing because the foundation is toxic.
yeah. Well, I think one of the really interesting things that I think the phenomenon of like the death doula illustrates about our culture is that like so many, I think that probably a lot of people become death doulas because they know that they're going to have to at some point in their life sit with a loved one
Yeah,
as their loved one is passing, to the other side. And I think that a lot of us feel like, what am I going to do? Like, I want to be there. I want to like to do the meaningful things. I want to do it right. I want to do it well. Like, if I have to be there for somebody at that moment, I want it to be beautiful. But I think a lot of people just don't even know what that would look like because we've been so conditioned not to like have this as a part of our life.
yeah,
And when I was a kid, I mean, and this is probably one of the reasons why I'm not as afraid of thinking and talking about death. But when I was a kid, my mom made sure that I was there when my grandparents were dying.
yeah,
And, I mean, like it was really hard and sad, but it was also really beautiful
yeah,
because, they just, there were so many moments in those transition points where I just saw them in a new way
yeah,
and, understood my mom's relationship with them in a new way and our relationship. And it was really transformative for me
yeah,
as a pretty young kid, but it also gave me the sense of just like this is something that we can do together as people.
Yeah.
And I think that so many of us just kind of feel like, I want to be able to do that, but I don't know how. And so I think that like we turn to the internet or
Yep.
like credentialing, and this is
Well,
like
we
this.
turn to a lot of things, right? I mean, we numb ourselves because we don't understand, we don't live in a culture that knows how to grieve. You know, my family is from Oaxaca, Mexico, and when you die, I mean, it's very similar to the Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva. You're with family, you're with each other. You cook, you know, there's communion in the midst of loss. There's togetherness in the midst of absence. And we don't know how to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny. I feel like I keep seeing one of the little memes I keep seeing now on like social media is like throw dinner parties,
Right.
right? It's like people need like a very specific like object,
Template? Yeah.
right? Like it's like, okay, I'm going to build community. I'm going to throw a dinner party, right?
Right.
But it's just like a different thing than just being like randomly like, hey, do you want to come
Yeah.
over? We could get dinner or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's so much about, right, like being, having these like kind of like packaged
Right.
experiences or packaged objects that
Right.
we can purchase or sell, or it's like, well, how do I really want to make it worth it for somebody to come over to my house? I'm going to throw a dinner party,
Right.
right? So that it's like this experience that we can have, rather than just like, I'm going to call up my friend and see if they're busy, and if not, maybe they want to come over, or if they're not super busy, maybe we'll just like sit around on the phone forever. I mean, you probably spent a lot of time like talking on the phone as a teenager, right?
Yeah.
Like that was
Yeah.
the thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, if I want to talk to someone, I text them, hey, could we have a phone call? I don't want to Zoom. I want to be an old fashioned, and I put on my headphones and I take a walk and I talk to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I need to recover some of those practices that
Yeah.
shaped me.
Yeah. But it is interesting too how much just like and maybe this is just because I'm like getting old and I have like a very like scheduled life and I have a kid, and like it's just like every single day there's just like
Yeah.
every hour of the day is like slotted out,
Yeah.
like. But it is interesting to me how little just sort of informal downtime I have,
Yeah.
where I'm just like just hanging out with people, and
Yeah. We need that.
yeah.
We need to learn how to play. I think that's part of this embracing death. Let's learn how to play. We all probably work too much. Our lives are super scheduled, and I can't keep up with my emails. So how do we recover ourselves and each other in this moment of collapse?
Yeah. And I do think that actually, like, I think that some of the best parts of theology are like where it becomes a certain form of play, right? I mean, I
Mm,
think for me, you know, I think that like a lot of what turns a lot of people off to like theology, and I'm not necessarily talking about academic theology here, but just like the act of just like thinking about things that are unseen.
yeah.
Let's just use a
Yeah.
really definition like that,
Yeah.
right? Thinking about the world of things unseen. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that a lot of people are just like, how can I think about that if I can't see it?
Mm,
Why would I want to think about that stuff if it doesn't really exist? But for me, like that's exactly why it's like fun and exciting. Is it's just like, well, I know intuitively that that stuff is real, but I don't really know how to describe it, or like why it's super relevant in this moment or that moment, or how to talk about it. And so I do think that like part of what's fun about it is playing around with language and playing around with ideas and playing around with metaphors and trying to say like, well, what if we think about it like this? And then people are either like, yeah, or they're like, no. Um,
yeah.
but it's sort of like it's a little bit like a game, right? It's an intellectual game.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I think is the best part about doing theology. And that doesn't require an institution,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
just
It's this right here.
Yeah. But I also like, man, if my kid's got to go to school, you know what I mean? Like, I want her to be able to do that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Like,
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
think is where my lament for the sort of like extrication of theology from like American educational institutions comes from. It's just like if kids are going to have to, if kids and young people and grown-ups have to do this whole like education thing,
Yeah.
like that isn't something that we should lose. Like that's something that should still be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the question is, what does it mean to make meaning right now? In the face of everything that we're witnessing. I mean, my timeline is full of horrible things. And I'm not real clear on how to make meaning.
I mean, I will say, like, it's gotten really difficult to have conversations with my students about this kind of stuff because I know that they are pretty divided in terms of how they want to make meaning out of the experiences that they're having right now. And I am just so keenly aware at all times of the fact that, like, the kind of meaning that one student in the class is going to make out of the text that we're reading or the conversations that we're having is the kind of meaning that I think is going to feel really hurtful to another student in the class because I think we live in such kind of polarized
Right.
times and
Right.
contexts. So it's just I feel like it requires so much careful navigation and like a way of like anticipating what the problems might be, like carefully curating the things that we're talking about so that we can, have this conversation instead of that
Yeah.
conversation. But it does really feel like sometimes walking around landmines to have conversations about stuff, especially stuff that like kind of like hits as deep or like touches people as deeply as something like theology,
Right. Right. The world we live in. The world we live in. This has been so good. Thank you. I hope that we can do this again some other time. Let the people know again the name of your Substack and where to find you.
Yeah, so my Substack is called Galactic Underworlds. If you forget that, my website is beatricemarovich.com, and I have a link to my book, SisterDeath, there. And thanks so much for having me as part of this conversation. It was great to talk to you, and
Yeah.
definitely look
Yeah.
forward to another chat.
We're going to keep it going. Thank you.
All right.